Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Adriana was in a hurry to get home. She left for just half an hour to buy medicine for little Edgar. She waited in line for a long time while an unpleasant, stinky man tried to buy a few vials of the alcohol solution. All the customers noticed him and began to grumble. But the pharmacist did not care what people wanted to buy in the pharmacy. Profits were the main thing. Finally, Adriana managed to buy the necessary medicine and rushed home. After all, besides 10-month-old Edgar, she had 3 other children. She was a mother of many children. She received certain payments from the state, but it still wasn't enough. Christian, her eldest son, took care of younger children at home, even though he was only 9. However, the boy behaved bravely and helped his mother as much as he could. He changed diapers and fed his baby brother. He put him to bed and sang him lullabies. On top of everything else, Adriana still had to go to work on the night shift. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital. She got a miserable salary, but it helped the whole family to survive. Her husband Mauro died 3 months ago. He was hit by a car as he was crossing the road. Adriana was left alone with 4 children. But soon she was able to pull herself together and move on with her life. She never left her children with her neighbors because they were either alcoholics or sleazy people. All they did was constantly ask her for money to buy booze or complain about their miserable lives. Adriana tried to calm them down and explain that she had a lot of problems too. But these marginal individuals didn't even realize the abyss they were going to. That was the kind of people she had to live in the neighborhood with. At the same time, she was used to them and taught her children to avoid them. Adriana could not allow these alcoholics to harm her children, and like an eagle, she defended her family. But they respected and even were afraid of her, so they just didn't dare to annoy Adriana's family. Adriana was rushing home and didn't notice when she tried to run across the road in the wrong place. At one point, she almost did the same thing that killed her husband, but at the last second, someone grabbed Adriana by the sleeve. She turned around and saw an elderly woman in old and tattered clothes. It was obvious that she was a beggar who had come from nowhere. This woman literally dragged Adriana back onto the sidewalk at the last moment. Without her help, a car could hit Adriana. Just at that moment, an expensive car rushed past at high speed. The driver didn't even pay attention to what happened, although he was well aware that he was in a residential area, not on the highway. With a short exhale, Adriana lowered her head guiltily. The woman who had saved her looked about 60 years old. To be more specific, she was old enough to be Adriana's mother. Adriana turned 32 this year. She was in the prime of her life. The stranger fixed her scarf and looked at Adriana with a heavy gaze. "Why are you running across the road so fast? Are you going to die?" she asked reproachfully. Blushing from shock, and maybe from embarrassment, Adriana quietly replied, "No, I was just rushing home to bring medicine. My youngest baby is sick, and there are 4 of them, and I have no one to look after them. My eldest son helps out, but he's only 9. The poor woman shook her head and invited Adriana to sit down on the bench near the bus stop. She didn't emit the smell that usually accompanied all the homeless people. Adriana also noticed that the woman took care of herself. Her fingernails were not dirty and her teeth were rock. It was as if by some fatal accident she became homeless. At the same time, the woman sympathized with Adriana about her difficult family situation and offered something that Adriana didn't expect. "Honey, can I help you? Are you serious?" Adriana answered, frowning her eyebrows. "Of course I am. I love kids," she replied with a smile on her face. "By the way, my name is Paula, and I am glad that I met you. Nice to meet you, and I'm Adriana. I didn't even think about it. I mean, you are. I know that I am dressed really poorly. Please don't think about it now." Paula interrupted her. "That's a long story. I'll tell you sometime. And don't be afraid of me. I won't steal anything from you, and I won't hurt the children." However, Adriana still had serious doubts about this woman because she had never seen her before and didn't even know anything about her and her life. Besides, Adriana wasn't even sure if it was her real name. What if she was a criminal, using a fake name so no one could find her later? Adriana was confused and did not know whether to accept or refuse Paula's offer. Paula was a stranger, but at the same time, the elderly eyes radiated kindness. Adriana saw an ocean of positivity in those eyes, as if the closest and dearest person was looking at her. Thoughts kept swirling in her head. What if say yes? Won't she fool me? Would I regret it? At the same time, Adriana was in a desperate situation. There really was no one to look after the children. Even her friend refused to help. Adriana had called her once and asked her to babysit them, but she said she had a promising date with an interesting man. At that moment, Adriana even thought about her personal life, which she hadn't had in a long time and was unlikely to ever have. Adriana knew that she shouldn't even dream of having a personal life until the children were adults. Adriana realized the hopelessness of the situation, so she devoted herself wholeheartedly to their upbringing. She could not do otherwise. Her conscience would not allow it. After weighing the pros and cons, Adriana accepted Paula's offer. She had no other choice, and Paula did not even mention money. It seemed as if the woman was going to babysit her children for free, and that only proved the great nobility. Paula could ask for money and not make any gesture of goodwill. But no, that did not happen. And 20 minutes later, they were at Adriana's home. The apartment was tidy, which was a sign of Adriana's meticulousness. Paula looked around and said cautiously, "It's nice and warm here." "We do our best," Adriana replied with a shrug. "Come on in, let's have some tea." Children came out of the noise in the corridor. They immediately perked up and started asking, "Who are you, miss?" "Our grandmother?" Tears came to Paula's eyes. She took a handkerchief from her pocket and wiped her face. Noticing her confusion and excitement, Adriana jokingly answered the children, "Yes, it's Grandma, just for an hour." The last word had no effect on them. They still didn't understand what she meant. The main thing they heard was Grandma. Everything else fell by the wayside. The children immediately smiled and started hugging the old woman. She almost cried again from surprise, but she managed to restrain herself. Paula looked at Adriana and laughed loudly. Adriana also began to laugh. At the same time, little Edgar received a portion of the medicine, and he felt a little better. Adriana checked his temperature just in case, and it was not critical. After giving Paula a cup of tea, she began to get ready for work and give her instructions. If Edgar's temperature rises again, give him an antipyretic syrup. "Okay, I understand. Don't worry about anything," she nodded. "I'll do everything right." "Yes, all the medicine is on that shelf." Adriana continued to explain and pointed to the shelf. "I have already fed the children, but if you are hungry, soup is in the fridge, and there are also meatballs and pasta there. Also, baby food is on the counter. Christian knows, he'll show you. You can go to work and don't worry about anything." Adriana nodded and thought to herself, "Don't worry. They are my children, and I know you for no more than an hour." At the same time, her gut told her that she really shouldn't worry, and her heart didn't tingle in between. Everything said that Paula was incapable of hurting anyone. Therefore, Adriana could go to work knowing that nothing would happen at home. But as she walked to the hospital, she still had anxious thoughts. First of all, about the fact that life had been so hard. After her husband's death, it was not easy for her. There was no one to help her, and there was no one she knew who would support her. It was a hopeless situation that she had to cope with alone. Adriana couldn't even imagine what would have happened if she had given up. Most likely, she would have just been crushed by life's problems, and her children would be in the orphanage, simply because she would not be able to support and educate them. However, Adriana managed to avoid this, and all thanks to Mauro, who was an orphan. But he knew how to find a way out of any situation. There was a situation when they urgently needed to pay for the treatment of their eldest son. Adriana called everyone she knew at the time, but could not find the money. And then her husband made a deal with a neighbor who had always hated them, that he would help him finish building the garage. The neighbor, oddly enough, agreed, and Mauro ended up earning enough money for the treatment. In fact, he was willing to humiliate himself for the sake of his son. Adriana remembered that, and now, when she had to find someone to babysit her children, she put aside her principles and worries too. She realized that she had to think only about the children and nothing else. Her parents were alcoholics, and it was pointless to expect help from them. But in the old days when they had been sober, Adriana didn't see anything good either. Her mother had told her at the time, "If you're married, you're all grown up, so solve your problems on your own." How could she expect to get any help after that? Naturally, Adriana gave up and stopped all communication with them. She was ashamed not only to talk to them, but even to approach them. With these heavy thoughts, she hurried to work, but no matter how much she rushed to work, she was still late. The head of the department, Señor Tlatoa, met her in the staff room. "Why the hell are you late again, dear?" His menacing stare made Adriana shudder. "If it happens again, I'll fire you or take away your bonus." Adriana almost cried in response but restrained herself, and immediately the thought flashed through her head. My salary is already miserable, and he wants to take away my bonus? What a monster. Of course, she didn't say it out loud. "Sorry, Señor Tlatoa. It will not happen again." After almost bowing at his feet, Adriana snuck into the back room. Her colleague Esmeralda, who had come to work here only a couple of months before, was already changing there. She was also hired as a nurse because there were no other jobs available. When she saw Adriana, she asked with a smile on her face, "Hi, why are you breathing so heavily? Were the wolves chasing you?" "Hello, I would rather be chased by wolves." Adriana shook her head. "I had to run to work. I thought I would make it in time, but I was still late. And unfortunately, Señor Tlatoa saw me entering the hospital. So," she asked with an undisguised sneer. "Don't even ask, Esmeralda, it's bad," Adriana said. "He threatened to fire me if I was late again." "Actually, he can really do that," Esmeralda said sadly. "I hope everything will be all right," Adriana replied with annoyance in her voice. "Listen, I forgot to ask you something. Who babysits your kids when you go to work?" "Usually Christian, my eldest son," Adriana answered uncertainly. "But today a woman helped me, or rather a beggar. I guess that's the right word. I met her by chance in the street. She saved me from death." "What? How did it happen?" "I was about to run across the road in a wrong place and almost got under the wheels." "Wow, what a gift from fate." "So, after that you invited her home?" "Yeah, she offered to babysit my children, but Paula seems to me to be a decent woman. I didn't see any ID, but she is about 60. I don't think people of that age are capable of any kind of meanness." "You are so gullible. How could you trust a stranger you met a minute ago?" Her colleague laughed right in her face. "Are you out of your mind? You left the kids with some unknown woman you just met. She's probably already robbed your apartment, and the kids are running around hungry and calling for their mother." No, she wouldn't do that." Adriana shook her head negatively. "Well, okay, it's none of my business. Let's go to work, or Señor Tlatoa will really fire us." They should not have been afraid of being fired, because being a nurse was hard and stressful, and the salary was miserable. There were not many people in the city willing to take care of sick people for low salary, but there were no other suitable vacancies either. At least at the hospital, they got paid on time. Adriana went to the rooms while Esmeralda began to clean the floors in the hallway. As she cleaned the rooms, she continued to think about how her children were doing. Her colleagues' doubts about Paula stuck in her head. Adriana worried that something might have happened to them. At one point, she even had a suspicion. Maybe Esmeralda is right? At the same time, her intuition told her that her worries were in vain, and she was just making up problems that didn't exist. Not noticing someone's slippers near one of the beds, she nearly tripped over them. She managed to keep her balance, but the patient's bedpan, with the remains of what was in it, fell loudly to the floor. An elderly woman lying on a nearby bed grumbled and began to call for a doctor. A few minutes later, the head of the department came in and asked, "What happened?" "Quiet your nurse. She won't let me sleep," the old woman muttered. "What happened, Adriana?" The head of the department asked sternly. I just did not notice someone's slippers and almost fell down. Adriana tried to explain. And the bedpan fell out of my hands, causing the noise. Please try to be more careful next time and do your job properly, Adriana, the head of the department said, and left the room. The incident was over, but it left a bitter residue in Adriana's soul. She had received a verbal punishment just for doing her job properly. Once again, Adriana was convinced that the position of nurse was a thankless one. When she left the ward, she leaned against the wall and wept softly. Esmeralda was there and saw her in this condition. What happened? Who hurt you? As always, I got in the heat of the moment. Adriana said through her tears and told her friend what had just happened in the ward. No conscience at all. They could have said thank you. Esmeralda shook her head, referring to the patients. But people at that age often behave this way, and some of them weren't happy to live to that age. They would have been happy to go to another world, but their time has not yet come. Exactly, Adriana said after calming down a little. Sometimes even I imagine myself as an old woman, and it makes me sick because it's really hard for them, and we can't understand them. That was the end of the conversation about the incident in the ward because the head of the department appeared and looked at them intently. Esmeralda moved on to clean the floors, and Adriana continued to check the rooms. As it turned out, Señor Tlatoa liked Adriana and tried to court her. But he had children and a wife, and he dreamed of making the nurse his mistress. Adriana knew this and rejected his courtship in every way. She had no intention of becoming a mistress, and she wanted nothing to do with such an unstable man. She could not expect anything good from him. Alejandro was furious because of this, not understanding why Adriana refused, for he had offered her his love and gifts, promising to make her a queen. I'll do anything for you, he said when they were alone. No, I'd rather be alone than with you, she shook her head negatively. Adriana only made the head of the department angry, and he was always looking for a reason to criticize her. At the same time, today she was late again. Señor Tlatoa only threatened to fire her. He continued his attempts to conquer Adriana, but the nurse didn't even dare to think about having an affair with a married man. Adriana dreamed of great love, of everything being mutual. Her favorite books were women's novels. She found solace and inspiration for herself in such books. At the same time, Adriana did not believe in fairy tales about noble princes. Only young girls believe in fairy tales. At her age, it was shameful to think about free gifts of fate. She relied only on her own strength. After going around all the rooms, she joined her co-worker, and together they cleaned all the floors much faster. After that, the nurses returned to the staff room. I advise you not to pay any attention to him, Esmeralda said as she turned on the kettle. If you are talking about Alejandro, I'd have already forgotten about everything, said Adriana. Let's better eat donuts. They are still fresh. Adriana did her job and did not notice that it was already morning. Her night shift was almost over. She glanced at her watch and involuntarily yawned, muttering to herself, "There goes another night." Did you say something to Adriana? Señor Tlatoa suddenly asked her from behind. Yes, I said, it's good to see that all the patients are doing well today. Adriana replied confidently and without hesitation. Well, that's because they are under my supervision. Alejandro tapped his chest. Adriana did not answer, only nodded her head. At the same time, she barely had the strength not to laugh. It seemed that the head of the department liked to prove that he was the best. On the other hand, there was simply no one to check his professional skills. After her shift was over, Adriana changed quickly and rushed home as fast as she could. She didn't even say goodbye to Esmeralda as she ran past, but her co-worker amusingly said it instead of Adriana. Goodbye to you and goodbye to me. Esmeralda smiled and walked out of the hospital building too. Her heart nearly jumped out of her chest as she ran home. Adriana was so worried about the children. She didn't know how they had spent the night, especially since they didn't have a phone. At the same time, Adriana hoped that Paula had done nothing wrong. Something told her everything was all right, but she couldn't calm down. When she ran into the front yard and stopped by the entryway to catch her breath, the first thing she did was look at the windows. The kitchen vent was open, and white steam was wafting out, and the first thought that came to mind was, is she cooking something? And what was her surprise when she came home and saw hot pancakes on the table? The children immediately came rushing out of their rooms. They looked well fed and clean. It looked as if the guest had already fed them. To be honest, Adriana was shocked to see this. "You are a magician, Paula." The eldest son, Christian, brought the youngest Edgar in his arms and proudly said, "Mom, he's better. He doesn't have a fever anymore." Adriana touched his forehead and was surprised to find that it was not hot. "This morning he had a fever," she shook her head. "I made him an herbal compress. Well, the syrup came in handy too, but traditional medicine was better." "I don't know what to say," Adriana said, confused. "I thought it would be clutter and mess." "Is that what you wanted to say?" Paula asked. "Well, not exactly, but something like that." Adriana nodded. "I can't believe my eyes now." "Don't look so surprised. I promised you it would be all right," Paula said with her head tilted to the side. "Sit down and enjoy the pancakes. By the way, I fed the kids, but if they want more, there's enough for everyone." Adriana couldn't help but cry, and then she hugged Paula. "You are my guardian angel." These words were like a balm to Paula's heart. After calming down a bit, the women sat down at the table for tea and pancakes. They were so delicious that Adriana didn't notice how she ate 3 pancakes in just a minute. After satisfying her morning hunger, she cautiously asked, "Excuse me for asking, but how did you end up in this situation?" "You know, Adriana, there's not much to tell," Paula shrugged. "I don't remember much. I woke up in a ditch without ID or money. It was almost a year ago. I had a wound on my head, and I could hardly stand up. What a horror! Wasn't there anybody around?" Adriana asked with regret in her voice. "Well, some tramps picked me up and took me to their shack. They gave me some new clothes because mine was in a bad condition. I do not know how long I was in this ditch, so I put on what they gave me. There was no other choice." "How did this even happen?" "I don't remember, Adriana. I don't remember anything at all." Paula shook her head. "Did you try to go to the police?" Adriana continued to ask. "Are you kidding?" "Of course. I came there and explained my situation, but they wouldn't even accept my report. I do not understand. It is their responsibility." Adriana was surprised. "There was a policeman there. He told me to fuck off and also said that I interfered with him helping decent people. Tell me, Adriana, am I not a decent person and not worthy of respect?" The woman cried again, and then Adriana gave her a handkerchief. "You are a good person," she reassured Paula. "You just met a soulless, inhuman cop. It happens, you know, if you're not a relative or a friend, they will not be in a hurry to help you. Probably. That's why I left without getting any help." The woman shook her head. "I feel sorry for you because you were a hostage to the circumstances. And as for the police, it's just a system that can't seem to be eradicated." Deep in her heart, Adriana was not just sympathetic. She was angry that Paula could not get any help. The woman had lost her memory and was on the margins of life. After reflecting on her problems, Adriana suggested, "Stay with us. There is enough room. I think the kids would be happy if you stayed with us." "Are you sure about this?" "I only wanted to help a little," Paula asked cautiously. "I am very grateful to you, so I ask you to continue to babysit the children." Adriana insisted. "I work in shifts as a nurse in the hospital. Children are often left alone." "I understand." "I agree." Paula nodded. "Especially since I have nowhere to go anyway. But it's too early to give up on yourself," said Adriana. There was a happy smile on Paula's face because now she could live in normal conditions and no longer waste time looking for food. Having agreed on what needed to be done and at what time, Adriana continued to work calmly. The head of the department still tried to flirt with the nurse, but always ran into a wall of aloofness, as if he were banging his head against it. Adriana didn't want any relation with him, so she tried to avoid Señor Tlatoa. At the same time, her co-worker Esmeralda did not stop teasing about the beggar. One day they were in the staff room, and she asked, "Well, hasn't she stolen everything from the apartment yet? My God, where did you get that idea from?" Adriana said grudgingly, "She and I are completely idyllic. I've never met anyone who could help like that before. No wonder there are many such people everywhere." Esmeralda retorted with a shrug. "Well, name one person who would help you," Adriana suggested. Esmeralda hesitated to answer. "You see, I don't think anyone is willing to help out like that without expecting a benefit." My friend, you're right," Esmeralda agreed. "And I'm sorry I talked to you about that beggar woman like that. Her name is Paula, and she's old enough to be your mother too," Adriana corrected her. "Life has already brought her to the bottom. She's having a hard time. At least let's not gossip." Okay, I'll shut up." "Great, let's get to work." Adriana tapped her on the shoulder, and they went off to do their chores. Esmeralda was no longer trying to tease Adriana and make jokes about Paula. On the contrary, she wondered how she was doing. Her co-worker seemed to feel sympathy for her too, especially since Adriana had told her that Paula had lost her memory. Esmeralda even brought some clothes for Paula. Esmeralda's mother died 6 months ago, and she had a lot of her clothes. She did not dare to throw them away, and the universe helped find the person who really needed it. Paula thanked Esmeralda and invited her for dinner. Surprisingly, Paula was a wonderful cook, except that she could not remember where she got that skill. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival at Adriana's apartment. During this time, Paula fully adapted to normal life. In addition, the children also got used to her, and strangely enough, they called her Grandma. They thought she had been away for a while, and now she was back, but their mother did not even think of disproving their assumptions, so they lived like one big family. But soon something terrible happened that knocked everyone out of whack. The doctors diagnosed Adriana's eldest son with heart disease. He had complained of malaise and headaches before, and now the doctor shocked them with this diagnosis. Adriana began to rush around looking for money for surgery. The doctor said it was like a time bomb. The sooner the surgery is done, the better. If they wait too long, then no one could tell what would happen next. The doctors were doing their best, but their power was not unlimited. Adriana could only hope that the charitable foundation she contacted would help her. Time passed, but there was no progress. Adriana was torn between her home and her job, and she also could not get the mystery of Paula out of her mind. It's just impossible that she doesn't have relatives or friends. Someone had to look for this woman. Adriana did not know who and where, but she hoped to get information soon. Besides, she wanted to help Paula find her relatives. While she was trying to raise money for her son's surgery, Adriana involved volunteers in the search for her guest's family. She briefly told them what had happened to her and sent them Paula's photos. The volunteers promised to help. "We will do our best," she was assured by her team leader Rafael. "We have no one else to rely on." Adriana replied, "My son needs expensive surgery, so I'm running around like a squirrel in a wheel. Maybe we can help you with that too?" Rafael asked cautiously. "No, thank you. It's enough what you do." Adriana shook her head. "I can take care of my son." Volunteers began a search and kept in touch with Adriana. There wasn't much to share yet, though. No one knew Paula in the places where vagrants usually lived. They showed them her photos, but they just denied it, repeating the same phrase. "We don't know anything. We didn't see anyone." It was strange that Paula had spent so much time among them, and they didn't remember her. Or maybe they just didn't want to get involved because they were afraid they'd be taken to the police. After all, many of them had legal problems. For example, they had no ID. The vagrants were not bothered by this fact, but the law enforcement officers might have been seriously concerned. Usually, if a homeless person was caught without ID, they would check him through the database, and then, if there were no problems with the law, they would send them for penal labor. That's why the homeless didn't want to talk to anyone. On the other hand, they wouldn't have been able to tell them anything worthwhile. Paula said she woke up in some ditch, but she could not remember how she got there. It was a vicious circle from which there was no way out yet. Meanwhile, the search did not stop. Volunteers promised to do everything possible, and the nurse herself tried to find him. Adriana used social media and other internet resources. Paula watched her actions and only lamented. "I don't think it will ever work out." "Why do you think so?" Adriana asked. "If I had loving relatives, they would somehow show up with their search." Paula answered ironically. "I will still try to find them if you don't mind." Adriana continued. "Of course, I'm all for it, but I am so ashamed that I live at your place. You must be tired of me." "Don't talk nonsense," Adriana said. "We are not tired. Just look at the boys. They've changed a lot. It's like they cheered up when you came to us. They are smiling. I'm so happy when I see them smiling. Things were different before you came." "Maybe you're right, and we should look for people who care about me as you do," Paula agreed. "Exactly, we shouldn't give up." Adriana confirmed her intentions. She continued her search. The hospital staff soon found out about it. Esmeralda was very supportive, but the rest of the employees laughed evilly, and some even wagged their fingers on their temples, saying, "You're just out of your mind to help some beggar woman. She's just a woman with a lot of trouble in her life." Adriana tried to convince them, "You don't know anything about it." Everyone at the hospital, except Esmeralda, thought that the beggar was just fooling her. They tried to dissuade Adriana from searching any further. They even offered to place Paula in a shelter for the homeless, but the girl stubbornly and rudely told them to mind their own business. She was not the kind of person to stop when things got tough. Adriana believed she would succeed, and they would find Paula's family. She didn't stop collecting money for her son's surgery either. She even began to work as a part-time janitor, but it still wasn't enough. But the clock was ticking. Adriana saw that her son was struggling, but it was getting harder and harder for him to stay calm. Christian loved his mother, so he convinced himself that she would find the money for the surgery, and he would no longer have to live in constant anticipation of the tragic end. At the same time, Señor Tlatoa drove Adriana to a nervous breakdown with his flirtations. She had no time to think about love games, and he just would not stop, so she rudely responded to him. "Señor Tlatoa, leave me alone, or I'll sue you for harassment. I already have a lot of problems, and now you're following me around. Have you lost your mind?" he shouted. "You've been brainwashed by that beggar. Wake up. She's not worth the effort. You're wasting your time. There's something wrong with your brain. You have a wife. Flirt with her, not with me. And as for the beggar, as you called her, she's as human as anybody else, just like you." The head of the department got angry and tried to grab her. At that moment, the staff had already begun to come into the corridor. They heard the noise, so they decided to ask what was going on. They were shocked when they saw a fight between Señor Tlatoa and the nurse. Of course, they couldn't miss such a show. "What are you doing here? Go to your workplaces." Señor Tlatoa yelled at them. "Shout louder, so that the patients can hear you too." Adriana said ironically. "Anyway, you don't work here anymore." He summed up, "I fired you. Pack your belongings and get out." "Okay, whatever you say." The employees were shocked and began to talk about it in whispers. They had not expected such a culmination. Everyone hoped that the head of the department would calm down and that the conflict would be resolved peacefully. But no, Señor Tlatoa went all in and fired Adriana. But this outcome was expected because the conflict between them began a long time ago. Adriana refused intimacy, and he felt humiliated. Naturally, he couldn't stand it, so he made this scene in front of everyone. He thought Adriana would be frightened and beg for forgiveness. But she wasn't. The nurse turned out to be brave and strong and fought back. By doing so, Adriana harmed the reputation of the head of the department in the eyes of all his subordinates. And now he knew that he should not have counted on their loyalty in dealing with difficult issues. However, this did not bother Adriana in any way. She received her salary for the time worked and left the hospital. But before she said goodbye to everyone, she visited her former co-worker. Esmeralda was shocked when she found out what had happened. She was in another hospital building at the time. "I just can't believe he did that," she said indignantly. "Come on, it's okay. Everything will be fine. I can handle it." Adriana reassured Esmeralda, or maybe even herself. "What are you going to do now?" Esmeralda asked. "I'll get another job. I'll try to get a job in a private clinic," Adriana answered. "But to get a job there, you need recommendations," Esmeralda said, shrugging her shoulders. "I know, I'll figure something out," Adriana said. "Don't worry, I'll be fine. I've been through worse than this. Life never stands still." "You're an optimist," Esmeralda said, surprised. "Yes, it surprises even me sometimes." Adriana smiled. "Not long ago when Moro died, I didn't even know how to go on living. It seemed to me that the whole world went dark and the earth turned upside down. You have no idea what it's like to be alone with 4 children." "Yes, to be honest, I have no idea," Esmeralda shrugged. "I don't have kids yet. The main thing is to never lose heart." Adriana winked at her, and she left the hospital. Nothing else tied her to this place. However, it was a pity that her seniority was interrupted. On the other hand, Adriana had a whole heap of problems that needed to be dealt with urgently. The other day she heard from volunteers that they had found some information. Realizing she would have to talk to the family, Adriana went to the volunteers, but they only provided the address of Paula's son. And it turned out he was looking for his mother, but Santiago lived 90 kilometers away from here in a neighboring city. So Adriana had a reasonable question. Why couldn't he find her? Well, we don't know. We found him by chance. How so? Well, Santiago went there to leave a cat in the shelter because the cat missed its mistress and was causing a lot of trouble. What does the cat have to do with anything? Adriana asked. It was Paula's cat. Rafael continued. In the shelter, Santiago had shared his problem with one of the employees, so we found Paula's son through him. Wow! If he hadn't come to the shelter with a cat, we still wouldn't have found him. Exactly. Nodded Rafael. Here is Santiago's address. Go and tell him the good news. We didn't want to do it instead of you. We thought you would make a surprise. It really will be a surprise. Adriana agreed. Thank you guys, I owe you one. Well, we were also interested in participating in the search and finding out the truth, Rafael said. Adriana took a piece of paper with Paula's son's address on it. Obviously, she wouldn't tell her yet. She had to be sure that it was really Paula's son. After what Rafael had said about the shelter and the cat, Adriana suspected that Santiago could have gotten rid of his mother himself. If the cat had disturbed him, he could finish his mother off easily. But why didn't he just send her to a nursing home? Anyway, Adriana decided not to make up any stories, but just to go to Santiago and find out the truth. She was going to visit the neighboring city, but before the trip she instructed Paula, don't spoil them too much with sweets, or they'll get used to it. Are you going away for long? Paula asked cautiously. I think for a day, maybe 2, Adriana replied thoughtfully. The children came up to her and hugged their mother. She smiled back at them and kissed each one, but she hugged the youngest Edgar and the oldest Christian the longest. The boy smiled too, only Christian's smile was a little strained, but he pretended like everything was fine because he didn't want to upset Adriana. She waved goodbye to them from the cab, and then sadly lowered her head and cried. At that moment, it felt as if all her problems suddenly came crashing down on her head. Under the weight of gloomy thoughts, she went to the train station to take the first train to the neighboring city. It took her about 3 hours to get all the way there. Around 2 in the afternoon, Adriana arrived at the address. It was a luxurious 3-story house. It even looked like a palace, because Adriana had never seen such beauty before. The owner was probably an art connoisseur and a professional designer. Shivering, as if it was freezing outside, Adriana approached the door and rang the bell. After a few minutes, footsteps were heard and a man in his 30s appeared on the threshold. He looked at Adriana and then jerked his chin as if to ask who she was and what she wanted. Adriana was confused for a few seconds, but then she pulled herself together and took a picture out of her purse. The owner of the house was shocked when he saw the picture. Where did you get it, and where is my mother? His hands were shaking. "She's fine. She's with me," Adriana answered. "But I wonder how Paula ended up in another city." "Paula Aguilar," he corrected her. "Oh yes, I didn't know that," Adriana answered. "Aren't you Santiago?" "Yes, and how do you know my name?" The man answered in confusion. "It does not matter. Kind people helped me," she said. "By the way, my name is Adriana, and I found your mother, or rather we met by chance. Come inside, let's talk." Santiago invited her and let her go ahead. Adriana went inside and was even more surprised. The beauty outside was just flowers. The real luster was in the interior decoration of the house. There were antique pieces of furniture and paintings, and marble tiles on the floor. The owner of the house obviously knew a lot about how to arrange his home in a cozy and comfortable way. Noticing the confusion of his guest, he cautiously said, "I inherited it all from my father. He was a connoisseur of antiques." "I see." Adriana nodded. "I thought that you bought it all." "No, I'm just a middle-class businessman," he said. "My father didn't go into business, but I got into it. He did what he liked, and I do business." "That's great," Adriana said, "but I can't understand one thing. How did your mother disappear?" "It happened a year ago." Santiago began the story. "I bought my mother a ticket to the sea. She wanted to go to the southern coast. But soon after she left, she disappeared. She didn't answer the phone. And I didn't know what to do." "Did you try to look for her?" Adriana asked. "Of course, I've searched the whole city, every corner, every street, but no results." Santiago shrugged. "Strange enough. You are a wealthy man. Couldn't your money help you find your mother?" Adriana said thoughtfully. "I understand. I have a big, beautiful house." Santiago repeated. "But I'm not a tycoon. I don't have as much money as you might think." "I understand." Adriana nodded. "Come on, let's go see your mother. Maybe she'll remember something." "What happened to her memory?" Santiago asked with horror. "I don't know. Maybe she has amnesia after the blow." Adriana shrugged. "Was she beaten?" "Too many questions. You can ask her about everything." "Okay, I'll start the car and call Joanna. I'll tell her I have to go," Santiago said and began to get ready. "Who is Joanna, if it is not a secret?" Adriana asked. "Well, she is my fiancé," he answered uncertainly. "Why are you so unsure of the answer?" Adriana asked again. "You know, we still can't get married," Santiago sadly answered. "So what is stopping you?" "First, my mother's disappearance," he went on to list, "then other problems." "Well, I made it clear to her that no wedding until my mother is found." "You are very rude to her." Adriana shook her head. "You could have gotten married, especially since so much time has passed." "Let's not talk about my fiancé. It's very important for me to find my mother now." 3 hours later, they arrived in Adriana's hometown. She was silent along the way, listening to music from the speakers, and he had time to call his fiancée and tell her that he was away on business. Finally, as they approached her apartment, Adriana quietly asked, "Well, are you ready?" "Yes, let's go." The key turned a couple of times in the keyhole. There was a click, and then the creak of the door opening. After a few seconds, Paula looked out into the hallway. On seeing her, Santiago shouted to the whole apartment, "Mom, my God, you're alive!" "Adriana, is that my son?" Paula pointed at him in shock and cried. "Yes, that's him, Paula Aguilar." "I can't believe it, my dear. Is that you?" Paula continued to sob. "It is me, Mom. I am Santiago, your son." He reached out to her and tried to embrace her. Paula did not pull away and hugged Santiago too. Although Adriana had expected the meeting to be more humble, without any bright emotions, considering that her guest had memory problems. However, it was different. Paula cried when she realized that her son was in front of her, and at the same moment she spoke loudly. "Right, I remember. It was all your fiancé's fault." "I do not understand. What do you mean?" Santiago asked with undisguised surprise. Wait, I don't feel good." Paula leaned against the wall. Santiago and Adriana picked Paula up and took her to the sofa. The children were noisily watching television at this time, but immediately fell silent. When they looked at their mother, they nodded and stopped making noise. After catching her breath, Paula looked around at everyone with tearful eyes and said, "Son, you shouldn't have messed with her. I knew there would be trouble." The stress of seeing him had caused her to remember the events of a year ago. It turned out that Paula really went to the coast. She wanted to relax on the warm sand and sunbathe in the southern sun. Santiago had bought a ticket to a nice hotel, where the beach was only 5 minutes' walk. He thought he had made a gift for his mother, but Santiago's fiancée had caused all of her problems. She was the one who had sixed her friends to hit Paula on the head, but they had also managed to say goodbye. Paula remembered those words. "Listen, old crap, leave Juana alone and don't bother her and Santiago ever again." "Are you serious, Mom?" the son asked with horror. "Yes, it sounds strange, but Juana wanted to kill me," Paula nodded. Then she told that initially she was against their relationship. Paula felt that Juana wasn't the right girl for him. Her heart felt that there would be trouble. That is why she insisted that they sign a marriage contract. Santiago was still hesitant at the time about the expediency of such formalities, but his mother convinced him that it would be better, and he finally agreed. But Juana flatly refused. Santiago even had to persuade her to sign the marriage contract. But then Mom went on vacation to the coast and disappeared. "I knew that your relationship would not go well. Mom, forgive me, for God's sake," Santiago cried. "I was blind, like a newborn kitten. I didn't see anything around me." "At least your eyes are open now," Adriana intervened. "What are you going to do about Juana?" "I will solve the problem," Santiago answered angrily and started to call someone. It turned out that he had asked his friends to beat all the information out of his ex-fiancée regarding the failed murder of his mother. Under their pressure and out of fear for her life, she confessed everything and ratted out her accomplices. They were soon arrested, and during the investigation, they testified that Juana had planned the whole thing. She was the one who decided to wait for Paula Aguilar at the nearest station and kill her. That's what they wanted to do, but they didn't want to take any risks and escorted the train 90 kilometers from their hometown. There, Paula got off the train at the station to buy water. They chose their moment and hit her in the head. But before they finished her, someone scared them off. Anyway, they threw Paula's body in a ditch, took out the documents and money, and escaped, thereby covering their tracks, and the police would not look for killers 90 kilometers away from the scene of the crime. However, the criminals told Juana that they did the job and got the money from her. When Santiago found out about everything, he couldn't believe it. Obviously, the wedding was disrupted. He didn't even come to talk to Juana, even though she was waiting for him. For him, Juana and everything related to her was in the past. Now the whole gang was getting ready to stand trial and go to jail for a long time. The investigator promised that they would receive the maximum sentences. Soon Paula completely regained her memory, and she was happy to know that all this time her son had hoped and waited. She took the cat back from the animal shelter. Luckily, she didn't have time to find new owners yet. At the same time, his relationship with Adriana had somehow started, especially since his mother really liked Adriana, and she was happy that her son finally found a good lady. But she had also demanded that her son do everything to save Christian. Santiago found good doctors and took the boy to a specialized clinic. There they examined him and assured that surgery would save Christian's life. Adriana was very worried about her son. She came to see him every day and prayed to God that everything would be okay. The doctors performed the surgery, and it was successful. Finally, joyful news came to the family. All of Adriana's children literally worshipped Santiago for saving their older brother. In the meantime, the relationship between them moved to a new level. Santiago started hinting that it would be good to get married, and he wasn't even scared that he was becoming the head of such a large family. Adriana was over the moon when Santiago proposed to her. It happened in the park, where they were strolling as a family. The children and Santiago's mother were watching from the side. Paula had become their real grandmother. As she hugged the children, she cried and said, "In joy and in sorrow, to the last breath. "I agree to be your wife," Adriana answered loudly. Her voice even made the doves fly up, and they began to circle above them. It was a good sign that signaled those two loving hearts had found each other. Paula came closer and held the hands of the children and blessed them into marriage. A month later, they got married. Santiago immediately told Adriana that they would live in his large house, and they sold Adriana's apartment. They used the money to buy 2 studio apartments in Santiago City to rent out and earn some extra money. By the way, Christian was recovering after surgery and was discharged just before his mother and Santiago's wedding. He took part in the festive celebration and congratulated the newlyweds from the bottom of his heart. For the first time, he tried to call Santiago Dad, although he had been wary of him before. After all, he realized how much good Santiago had done for their family. Moreover, he had saved his life by paying for the surgery. After the wedding, they began to prepare to move, so as not to delay. But then Adriana remembered that she had a debt to repay. Santiago also wondered who she hadn't given the money to. "I wonder when did you have time to borrow it?" "No, it's not about the money," Adriana objected. Santiago eventually brought her to the hospital she was fired from. Adriana easily found the head of the department. Señor Tlatoa was just checking in on the patients. She did not hesitate to tell him, looking in the eyes, what she thought of him and what he deserved. Adriana humiliated the head of the department and rebuked him for having affairs so that all the other female employees would know. To his misfortune, his wife came into the hospital and heard everything. No words can describe what began after that. Poor Señor Tlatoa tried to hide from his furious wife, but still got a slap from her. A terrible scandal broke out. After that, he instantly lost interest in flirting with anyone. Finally, she did everything she wanted, and now she could leave the city. Adriana and the children quickly adapted to the new place. Paula returned home as well, and the first thing she did was donate money to the volunteers and the animal shelter where her pets spent some time. Meanwhile, Santiago once hinted that it would be nice to have a baby together, and Adriana responded with a cute smile and a sly look.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.